This mic won't let me move. I tend to wander, but I'm not allowed to wander because this mic, can you hear me at the back? I am quite loud. Loud enough? Okay. So first I want to thank all of you. First I want to thank the university for giving us this wonderful place, although it took a while to find it. Secondly, I want to thank Circle of Peace for bringing me here, and I want to thank all of you for taking such a beautiful day. Instead of being out there, you're here. So I really am very thankful. It's a beautiful fall, crisp day in Portland. I'm very excited because usually when you get up in the morning, it's very cloudy here. So I've been very happy because all the 3 days that I've been here, I have seen the sunlight, and I've seen the mountains, and I've seen how beautiful Portland and Washington, Vancouver is. I always mix up between the two. I'm very sorry. I fly into Portland, so I think I'm in Portland, where I'm not in Portland. And Arif Humayun has to always correct me that, no, you are in Vancouver, Washington. Okay. So thank you. So I'll start now. What I'm going to do this afternoon is I will talk about women in general. I'll talk about women's rights in general. And I will take you 7th century when Islam came, what kind of rights women had, and then I'll take you full circle back to the 21st century. And I want us to decide how much have the rights changed, or how much have we gone backward, or have we gone forward. Yes, I want you to make that decision. So when we think about it, when we talk about the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, oftentimes when we think about it, we don't think about the similarities. We tend to think about the differences. You agree? And when we do that, mostly we do it about Islam, and mostly about Muslim women in Islam. Okay, so that's the problem that we face. That's our challenge. So the talk, this is going to be my content. I'm going to talk about these things. Okay? So when you think about women's rights have never been easy. It's been a struggle throughout history. No matter when and where, women have always had to fight for their rights. And if you think about just in the West, it's only been about 100 years that women got a right to vote. Yes, and at that time, in 1920, when women were given the right to vote, they were told that this is against the teachings of the Holy Bible. It would undermine family life if you allow women to vote. Okay? Then 40 years later, when President Kennedy established CSW, women were actually given more leadership roles. They were getting educated. They were out in the public. They were taking part in politics. And employers were not allowed to discriminate on race, gender, and religion. In 1979, the UN General Assembly adopted CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of all discrimination against all women. And this became the International Bill of Rights. And what are those rights? Affording women civil rights, reproductive rights, and gender rights. Okay? Keep that at the back of your mind. As recent as 20 years ago, at the 4th International Convention on Women, Hillary Clinton asserted that women's rights are human rights. Now, whenever I say this, I want to laugh. I don't want to laugh at Hillary Clinton. I want to laugh that only 20 years ago you realized that women are also human beings. I mean, it's very, very surprising that it has to be proclaimed loudly in an international meeting that, women are also human beings. So that is where I say it's laughable. In 2008, they had the global campaign to end violence against women. And 2010, just 8 years ago, the first Women's Equality Day was established, and activists continue to express support for CEDAW. So this is what we know in the West. And even though women have struggled hard and a lot of advancement has been made for the rights of women in the West, we know that every single day women's rights are exploited and violated throughout the world. Some of them are even exploited before they are born. For example, female infanticide, right? Sex-selective abortion. It's the ultimate form of discrimination against women. And why does it happen? Because culturally, sons are more valuable than daughters. They bring home a living, they take care of the family, whereas a woman, you're going to marry her away, and you're going to give a big dowry to get her married. So she's a burden to the family. The Dowry Prohibition Act came about in 1961, but as far as India is concerned and other countries are concerned, dowry is still a practice. It has not gone away. Okay? What about human trafficking, right? It's a $32 billion industry. It's the fastest growing industry in the USA and Canada. And unlike drugs and weapons, which are sold only once, human beings can be sold over and over again. Okay? And it does not discriminate at all. It doesn't matter what race, education, religion, or gender you belong to. Okay? What about domestic violence? This is data I've taken from United States. 20 people are physically abused per minute by an intimate partner. Women 5 times more likely to suffer from some sexual assault. 25% of women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. 3 out of 4 of us here, 75% of us here sitting here would probably know somebody who's going through it or has gone through domestic violence. It does not discriminate, and the cost of intimate partner violence exceeds $6 billion per year in medical services and mental health services. Okay? And we all know about the Me Too movement, yes? When it was established in 2006, Tarana Burke actually established it for women of color, and she was really doing it to support the victims. However, in 2017, when it became a huge movement because of a tweet from Alicia Milano, they began to talk about sexual assault and to make the perpetrators accountable, right? But we know, just from this, we know that women who are sexually assaulted, who are harassed at their workplace, they're already paying a price there, and then when they try to speak out, they continue to pay a bigger price. And we know that from more recent incidences that have occurred. So women struggle constantly to find their identity, to find their self-respect, their dignity. Okay. So then in summary, you'll all agree with me, women continue to face challenges even in the 21st century. They're denied their basic rights. This denial has no boundary. And so the question comes back that why? We are a modern country. We are educated people. We have the best of technologies. We have the best of everything. Why is it that this continues and we are helpless in the face of this continued discrimination? So let's go back 3,000 years and try to compare what I just told you. At that time, women were considered physically, mentally inferior to men. In Genesis chapter 3, Eve was the one who tempted Adam, and Eve was the one who brought the curse of God on mankind forever. In the 5th and 6th century Arabia, women were considered to be sexual objects. They were just property. They didn't have any rights. Birth to a daughter was a curse. Female infanticide was very common in those days. Women did not have a right to get educated or have free speech. Violence was a common practice. Okay? So this is 3,000 years ago. So then came Islam 1,400 years ago. And unlike popular belief, Islam is not a new religion. Okay? People always say it's a new religion. It is not. It is a continuation of the last 3, the major Abrahamic religions. It is a continuation of God's revelations to all of the prophets. Okay? And again, unlike popular belief that Prophet Muhammad is an architect of a new faith, he is not. Muslims consider him the seal of prophets. Why? Because he completed the religion of Prophet Abraham, Prophet Moses, and Prophet Jesus. Okay? The Holy Quran came. What does Quran mean? It's a book that's recited often. It's a compilation of revelations that came over 23 years, and it teaches Muslims. It's a book that gives us guidance. And what kind of guidance? The basic guidance, the common themes are equality, justice, and trying to find peace for yourself and peace for the world. Okay? The final revelation that Prophet Muhammad received was in 632 AD, and I'm going to quote it. "This day have I perfected your religion for you and completed my favor upon you and have chosen for you Islam as a religion." Okay? When this verse was revealed, Prophet Muhammad realized that he was getting many signals. Okay? The first was that the revelations are going to stop, because it's telling you, I have perfected your religion, I've completed my favor upon you. The second was, that's how we got the name Islam. Okay? So unlike Judaism that comes from the tribe of Judah, Christianity that comes from Jesus Christ, Islam the name doesn't come from a name of a person or a place. It's the message of God that came through this revelation. That's how we got the religion of Islam. Okay? When Prophet Muhammad realized that this is the final revelation, he gathered his people in the valley of Mount Arafat to give his final sermon. Okay? And a year later, he passed away. I'm going to give you snippets of the sermon only because I want to show you how much similarities we have rather than differences. And when you hear some of the words in the sermon, you're going to say, this is what I teach my children. This is what I try to, for myself. I try to practice for myself. So the first is, of course, the 5 pillars of Islam. Perform your 5 daily prayers, fast in the month of Ramadan, offer your zakat, and perform Hajj if you can. The second one talks about superiority. An Arab is not superior to a non-Arab, nor is a non-Arab superior to an Arab. A white is not superior to a black. A black is not superior to a white. But look at the condition that is in the sermon. The only one who's superior is the one who has good deeds and is a pious person. Okay? That is what makes us superior, not the color of our skin or our education or our socioeconomic backgrounds. When he talked about women, he said, take care of your women. Why? Because they have a right on you, you have a right on them. Remember that you have taken them as your wives under the trust of God and with His permission. So treat your women well, be kind to them because they're your partners and your helpers. The next one, return the goods that have been entrusted to you. Hurt no one so that no one hurts you. This is what we practice, we try to practice. And finally, remember that one day you will appear before God and you will answer for your deeds. So beware, do not stray from the path of righteousness after I am gone. So this is in a crux, this is his final sermon of Prophet Muhammad. Okay? So then I'm going to take you now that Islam was established, Prophet Muhammad had, all the revelations had come, the Quran was established. What did a woman look like in the 7th century? Okay? So the first woman was Khadija. Khadija was a wealthy woman. She was twice widowed. She was successful. She had her own business. When she first met Prophet Muhammad, she had heard about his reputation that he was an honest, hardworking man. So she hired him to work for her. When she saw his character, she proposed marriage to him. When she married him, she was 40 years old and he was 25. And they stayed married for 25 years. During that time, she was his only wife. She's the first person and the first woman to pledge allegiance and to become a Muslim. Okay? When we talk about Khadija, for Muslims, she has broken many myths because she was wealthy in her own right. She was a businesswoman in her own right. She was a woman in the society. She was a prominent person. She proposed marriage, and she gave all her wealth to her husband for the spread of Islam. So we consider her to be a very good role model for us. Then women during the time of Holy Prophet joined the combat. They were part shoulder to shoulder in the army. A woman, if she's not competent, she would be told, stay at home. But these are some examples I'm giving you of women who fought in the army in the cause of Islam. In the Holy Quran, we have mention of a number of very prominent women. Chapter 19 is completely devoted to Mother Mary. Okay? Complete story of Mother Mary, her mother, how she was devoted to the cause of religion, how she had the virgin birth, the struggles she went through, how Jesus Christ was born, what was the message of Jesus Christ. This is all in chapter 19. That is entitled Maryam, the chapter. She's also mentioned a lot in chapter 2. In chapter 66 is mentioned of Asya, who is the wife of Pharaoh. And if you remember, she was a woman who rescued baby Moses, sorry. She was the one the infant Moses, she was the woman who brought him into her home. And then Queen of Sheba is mentioned in 27 as a woman with a lot of leadership skill, warrior skill, and piety. At that time, women began to be permitted to come out in the public. They could participate in politics. And also in the Quran, there is no mention that a woman is limited in her role. In fact, Caliph Umar, who is the second caliph after the death of Prophet Muhammad, he appointed Al-Shafa, a woman, as a judge. Okay? So these are just some examples of women during the time of Prophet Muhammad. So if that is true, then why is it that when we talk about Muslim women, we all feel so sorry for them? Yes, and it's like an enigma. It's like a question mark, you know. We feel so sorry. I mean, they have so many problems. I'm standing here before you, a Muslim woman. And so I just feel like I want to ask you, what comes to your mind? What kind of questions come to you when you think of a Muslim woman? Subjugated, oppressed, not allowed to have an education, dominated by her husband or her brother, right? These are the images that come to your mind when you think of a Muslim woman, right? So these are some of the questions I get asked. Women don't have a right to an education, they're not allowed to work, they cannot travel, they are forced into marriages, they don't have the right to say, I want a divorce if the marriage is not working, and they are forced into polygamous marriages. But that's not all. They don't have a right to property, they don't have economic rights, they cannot have inheritance, they're victims of violence, female circumcision, honor killing, and they have to be covered from head to toe. Yes, these are some. I've just put a few down here because I don't want to keep you here all night long as we talk. Yes. So I'll just go through a few of them, and I hope I can convince you that some of our misconceptions are just fear or media. You know, you hear a lot of things, and also examples of extremists who then put these thoughts in your mind. Okay, so I'm going to remove some misconceptions. The first I'm going to talk about is how the Quran is very explicit about equality, accountability, and responsibility between both genders. Okay, very clear that it is not just the man, it is the woman as well who has equality, she has personal accountability, and she has certain responsibilities and obligations. So this is a very long verse that I've taken from the Quran, but I wanted to put it out there to show you how explicit the Quran is. Surely men who submit to God and women who submit to Him. Believing men, believing women. Obedient men, obedient women. Truthful men, truthful women. Men who are steadfast, women who are steadfast. Men who are humble, women who are humble. Men who give charity, women who give charity. Men who fast, women who fast. Men who guard their chastity, women who guard their chastity. Men who remember God, women who remember God. God has prepared for all of them forgiveness and a great reward. Right? So if women are inferior, how is it that God would say that, you know, you have equal rights to reach me, you have equal rights to gain a relationship with me? Men and women are equal in the rewards that they earn. It wouldn't be so if women were considered inferior to men. Under social responsibility, oftentimes we say women are cooped up in the house, Muslim women are not allowed to go out, they cannot talk, they cannot express their opinion. Maybe so in certain families, maybe so because of some cultural issues, but not because of the religion of Islam. Because look at the verse here. As for the believers, both men and women, it's very specific. They are friends and protectors of one another. They enjoin good and forbid evil. You cannot enjoin good and forbid evil if you're going to be cooped up in the house. You have a responsibility, a social responsibility. So social interactions are a component of human relationships. Equal rights. I will suffer not the work of any worker from among you, whether male or female, to be lost, you are from one another. And the next one is, our Lord is He who has endowed everything with its appropriate faculties and then guided it to its proper use. So what this verse tells me is that men and women have equal rights but diverse responsibilities. Otherwise, there's no need to make men and women. You just need one gender. You know, we all know that we are equipped with different physiology, different anatomy. Our brains work differently too. Our networks are different. The size of our brain are different. Certain parts of our brain are different. We process fear differently, happiness differently. We're different. And so our response, we're different. We bear children, men don't. And so all of this, God says, I have given you different appropriate faculties that you should guide them and use them in the proper way. Okay? And then personal accountability. Whoever chooses to follow the right path follows it for his own good. And whoever goes astray for his own good and for his own harm, and no one bears the burden of one another. Okay? So no father can bear a burden of his daughter. Daughter doesn't bear burden. We are all personally accountable for our own deeds when we answer to God. And then finally, while we are accountable, there's no compulsion. There's no compulsion in religion. Surely right has become distinguished from wrong. This verse is a very important and powerful verse. And the reason I think it's very powerful because of the second part of it. It says, surely right has become distinguished from wrong. All of us know what's right and wrong. So why do we have to force anybody? Within our hearts, we all know what is moral and what is immoral. We all know whether we are going in the right path or we are going in the wrong path. So once you already have this information, there's no need to force people against the will. And then, of course, there's personal accountability. Okay? So right to an education. The first word of revelation that Prophet Muhammad received was Iqra, which means read or learn in the name of your Lord. Okay? And the Quran has many, many verses. I've just picked two. Chapter 39, verse 10 says, can those who know be like those who do not know? And the second one, 20, verse 115 says, O my Lord, increase me in my knowledge. Okay. So these are just a few of the verses. In fact, this verse, many of us, if you're sitting here who are Muslims, when we were younger and we had an exam, our parents would tell us, make sure you read this verse before you go for your exam. So I would be saying it as I'm going to go to my class. Increase my knowledge. Make me sure I do well in my exam. And Prophet Muhammad advised his followers, seeking knowledge is the duty of every Muslim man and woman. He didn't say just Muslim men. He said Muslim men and women. He said seek knowledge from cradle to grave. A father who educates his daughters well will enter paradise. And a mother is a school. If she's educated, the whole people are educated. Okay? So these are the words and advice of Prophet Muhammad. Marital relationship. There is no force in marriage. A parent cannot force a child to get married if that girl says, I'm not willing to marry this person. O ye who believe, you're forbidden to inherit women against their will. Okay, these are Quranic verses. What you see are extremists, or you see people who are not following the true teachings of Islam. Several verses provide guidance for the husband and wife, how to lead your lives. He has created wives from amongst yourselves that you may find peace of mind, and he has put love and tenderness between you. And the second verse, chapter 2, 188, again, that's another verse that resonates very closely to me. They are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. What does a garment do? Just think of the way a husband-wife relationship is described in the Quran. They are a garment for you and you're a garment for them. What does a garment do? It protects us. It covers us. It hides our blemishes. It hides our weaknesses. Right? That's what we are supposed to do between a husband and wife. And that's what the Quran says is how a man and woman should be when they get married. Okay? Prophet Muhammad also advised that paradise lies under the feet of your mother, not the father. He said paradise lies under the feet of your mother. That means a woman was given such a high status that if she was a mother who brought up her children well, she would have the path to paradise. So when we think about this, and as a mother standing here, when I had my children when they were little, I would often look at this saying of Prophet Muhammad and ask myself that, am I the kind of mother under whose feet, my children would find paradise? Or am I the kind of mother under whose feet my children could find hell? How am I bringing up my children? What kind of example am I to my children? Right? So these are very good verses. If put to practice, it would really help us, and also to alleviate all this distrust amongst us. And the best amongst you is the one who behaves best towards his wife. So polygamy It was practiced by ancient Hebrews, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, and Assyrians. It was legalized by the Old and the New Testament. Prophets before Muhammad, except for Prophet Jesus Christ, who never got married, had many, many marriages, many, many wives. And it was practiced by pagan Arabs. At that time, there was no limit to the number of wives you could have. Okay? And then came the advent of Islam. And in Islam, the rule was monogamy, not polygamy. It is permitted, but it's not mandatory. That's a misconception we have. It is regulated and limited by instituting equal rights and status of wives. Now look at this verse, what it says. You can marry 2 or 3 up to 4 if you can be equally just with each of them. But if you feel that you cannot be treating them justly, then marry only 1. Think about it. I mean, all of us have our biases, we have our partiality. Even when you have 4 children, we don't treat all of them equally, right? There's always this level of, is there ever this equality among, so it says here very clearly, if you are not able to be just and treat each of them equally, then marry only 1. And that's a very strong condition. How many of us can be, even with our colleagues, even with our friends, I mean, there's always this level of some bias, some kind of objectivity, subjectivity, right? We all have it. So it's very, very difficult. It's a very important condition. Do we overlook it? Of course we overlook it. Polygamy was permitted only under certain conditions. The Quran is very specific. It was there for the welfare of the widows and the orphans of war. Because at that time, who was going to take care of all these women who were left behind after their husbands passed away? And the orphans who were left behind. Okay, that was the condition when polygamy was permitted. Whereas in the West, you should have 1 wife, but you can have many relationships. And that's allowed. There's no problem. But people frown upon the philosophy of polygamy. There's a very strong, clear guideline on when polygamy is permitted and how it is supposed to be practiced. So I consider it a practical solution. It provides legitimate status rather than the status of a mistress without legal, social, or moral rights. Divorce. Another misconception that women cannot seek divorce. Women can seek divorce. When a husband gives divorce, it is called talaq. When a woman seeks divorce, it is called khulla. When a woman seeks divorce, if she has any earnings, if she has any property, all of it belongs to her. But when the divorce takes place, her husband's property will be divided according to their marriage contract. A woman is entitled for support from her former husband if she needs it. Custody of children and alimony are not very specifically stated in the Quran. It's not given in terms of what the age of the child is as custody, time of custody. It doesn't talk about the amount of alimony. Instead, the Quran says that consult with one another in a fair and equitable manner. It says here, either take them back on equitable terms or set them free on equitable terms. But do not take them back to injure them or to have undue advantage of them. If anyone does that, he wrongs his own soul. So these are the verses put out there for negotiation between husband and wife in case the marriage is not working, and how they should work together for the children and for the alimony. Economic rights. Men shall have benefit for what they earn, and women shall have benefit for what they earn. Very clear. In Islam, women can keep all of the money that they earn, unless the woman chooses to support the family and says, I will put down so much for child's education, or I want to put down so much for household expenses. The husband doesn't have right on whatever the woman earns. It only belongs to her. Right to an inheritance. There are many, many verses, and there's a lot of confusion because of so many verses in the Quran. Men shall have a share in what parents and kinsfolk leave behind, and a woman shall have a share in what parents and kinsfolk leave behind. Okay? Talks about share, and the share is based on the status of the woman at that time. So Muslim woman, as I said, has very little financial obligations because most of the obligation rests on the man, whether he's the father, the brother, or the husband. So it depends on what phase of life she is at and how much she needs, what is the obligations, financial need. Accordingly, this inheritance is assigned. So this verse, a lot of people complain about this verse, and a lot of people have questioned me about this verse and say, see, women don't have equal rights in Islam. Because it says here, the share for a male, is twice that of a female. And I put here only when the inheritance is from the parents. And the man receives double his sister's share. Why? Because he has an legal obligation to provide for her support. So if you think about it, let's say there's an inheritance of 200,000, and we say both have to have equal rights. So the brother gets 100 and the sister gets 100, but the brother has legal obligation. He has to take care of his family, he takes care of his sister, he takes care of her till she gets married. So in his hand, he has much less. How much does the sister have? 100,000. But if we say it the way the Quran says, the share for the boy, the brother, is twice that of the female. So the brother has enough money to help the family take care of the sister, whereas whatever the sister earns, 100% of it is still in her hands. So you see, there is equality, there is wisdom. It's just that we don't realize the wisdom because we don't understand the context in which the Quranic verse was revealed. Okay? Islam does not endorse violence. We've talked about that. Look at this verse, what it says. Anyone who has saved one life, it is as if he has saved the whole of mankind. And anyone who has killed one person, it is like he has killed the whole of mankind. This is a verse from the Quran, and yet, look at what's going on, the extremists, Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's really, really sad that they have maligned the name of Islam and said it is in the name of Islam that all these killings are taking place. Killing of children was prohibited. You shall not kill your children for fear of poverty. We provide for them as well as for you. Killing is a gross offense. Honor killing. There is no honor in honor killing. It is a distorted word. There's no justification in any religion. It is an act of murder, period. It is an act of passion. And when you talk about passion, it is not just Muslims who are passionate. It's been there throughout times. These crimes occur everywhere. And no religion, if God is merciful, no religion is going to teach a father to kill his daughter, or a husband to gouge out his wife's eyes, or throw acid on a widow and burn her, or sell children for exchange of sex. Okay? No religion teaches that. Female circumcision, another one, where we say it's Muslims, poor women, they all have to be subjected to it. It is not an Islamic system. It's an African custom dated back 5,000 years ago. They found evidence of it in Egyptian mummies. In the 19th century Britain, female circumcision was done to manage epilepsy and bad behavior in women. Whatever that means. We all know the complications that occur with female circumcision, and World Health Organization banned it in 1997. FGM stands for female genital mutilation. Okay? It is still a cultural practice in Egypt, Somalia, Middle East, Indonesia, Asia. It is considered an honor in some cultures. It is another form of violence, and it is not really associated with any religion. It is not in the Quran. It has no basis. It was never practiced by Prophet Muhammad on any of his daughters. So how can we say that it is an Islamic custom and that Muslim families subject their daughters to this kind of a violent behavior? Okay? So concept of modesty, right? When this is another one that we have a lot of opinions about and judgments about. When we talk about modesty in Islam, and especially when we talk about a woman and we talk about her modesty, again, it comes back to judgments. She must be backward. She must be subjugated. She must be oppressed. Look at her, she's covered from head to toe. But in Islam, the main concept is that of modesty. And Prophet Muhammad said that verily for every religion there's a characteristic, and the characteristic of Islam is haya. Haya is modesty, but when you try to translate the word, you never get the full dimension of that word haya. Haya is a way of life. Haya is an attitude. Haya is your way of thinking. Haya is humility. Haya is lack of arrogance. Haya is shyness. Make sense? I'm trying to come out with that word because just when you say modest, it doesn't have that much of a, it doesn't bring that picture to your mind. So it's a way of life, it's an attitude. That's what we Muslims, whether man or woman, have to strive for haya. So modesty is applicable for both men and women. Believing men must restrain their looks and guard their body parts, and believing women should restrain their looks and guard their body parts. So it's not just for women, it's also for men. So while in Islam social interactions are allowed, are an essential part of our lives and are not discouraged, Islam does prohibit sexual relationships out of marriage. That is very explicit. Okay? So the Islamic hijab or the cover, I've put a couple of examples for you. They wear different types, and it all depends on where they come from, which part of the world they're coming from. They have a different way in which they cover their heads and their body. Okay? But hijab is not a new concept, right? We all know that. In the Bible, it was practiced 2,000 years ago during the time of Prophet Abraham. In the 13th century BC, all Assyrian women wore the veil except the prostitute. This is how they distinguished themselves from the prostitutes. In the Genesis, Rebekah, wife of Isaac, covered herself when strange men approached her. Old Testament Jewish women covered their faces, and today we know Christian nuns and Amish women cover their heads. So it's not a new concept at all, but it becomes something very important to discuss when it comes to a Muslim woman. Okay? So in summary then, what have I spoken about? I said that Islam gave women rights. In 1400 years ago, women were given rights, and those rights are compatible with the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights that were given 70 years ago. And I'm putting out Isabel Coleman's quotation in her book, Paradise Beneath Her Feet, where she questions and says, was Islam and the Prophet ahead of the times when these rights were extended to women in the 7th century AD? Okay? Something to think about. So I just want to come back to the Islamophobia, not only what we think about women in Islam, but in general what we think about Islam. And no better person to quote than Karen Armstrong herself, where she says, no religion in the modern world is as feared and misunderstood as Islam. And when she talks about women, she says, Muslim women are viewed as inferior species, they don't have a right to an education, and they're secluded from the society. So why do we have so much of fear? Okay? Why are Muslim women still struggling to find their voices? Why are the teachings, we have the teachings, but yet the way we practice and the way we treat our women seems to be in total contradiction, right? But there is no contradiction according to Shireen Abadi. She's the first Muslim woman from Iran to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003, and she says, there is no contradiction between Islam and women's rights. It is not Islam that's oppressive. It is the working interpretation of Islam that oppresses women. Right? And I think you will all agree with me that it is always the working interpretation of all religions that we use to justify our actions and what we think to be appropriate. Right? It's not just in Islam, it's everywhere. Right? So in terms of culture versus religion, let me just put out some of the different cultural challenges that we all face. Okay, women's rights are not contradictory to Islamic teachings. I've just shown you Quranic verses. It is the attitudes, it's the culture and tradition that is outdated. We have different interpretations based on culture, the tribe where you belong, what kind of family you come from, and those justifications are used to then suppress women. Political Islam, with the rise of political Islam, if you try to give a woman rights, they say, oh, it is anti-Islamic. Attitudes towards what they can wear, whether they can get educated, whether they can have an income, all of this has become a litmus test of Islamic piety these days. And gender equality is often state-sanctioned, it is not Islam-sanctioned. And then, of course, when you talk about women's treatment, you often find that where you have a lot of male dominance, you find women getting the harshest treatment. And that's not just in Islam, that's everywhere. Poverty, lack of education, lack of economic legal resources add to the harsh treatment of women. Then after 9/11, of course, there has been a bigger gap between Islam and the West. And then finally, I'm going to put this out to you because I feel that we are partly to blame. Muslims themselves are deviating from the progressive principles and practices of Islam. And I think Muslims are hijacking their own religion. Because when I showed you what beautiful teachings we have, why are women still oppressed and suppressed? When I've shown you about the equality, why is it that women don't have rights for education? Why in the Middle East we have the biggest struggles? We have struggles in Africa, in India, in Somalia, in Indonesia, where you have a lot of Muslim population. Why is there so much struggle? It's because we, Muslims ourselves, are not practicing our religion. And then you have a handful of people who come out into the media as the extremists who then kill women, abuse women, all in the name of Islam. Honor killing in the name of Islam. Female circumcision in the name of Islam. And they malign the name of Islam. The media then uses it because it's a very nice story to tell, and the rest of the world believes what they read. So I think we Muslims have a lot to blame. Okay? So I say women are not the problem, they are the solution. And I think all of you sitting here are going to agree with that. We are the solution. Why? Because research says it, not because I say it. Research says that if you invest in a woman, you create healthier families, you have better productive children, you have less poverty, and you have a stronger society. And women often underestimate their sphere of influence. You know, we play so many different phases in our life, but we forget just how much we can influence people around us, touch people, the family, the neighborhood, the society. We forget. We tend to be apologetic for who we are. So even if we become successful or if you become educated, we're always apologizing because, you know, that's what a woman does. So I want to give you this example, just two examples of women of the 21st century Muslim women who are role models. You have Tawakkul Qarman, the first Yemeni, first Arab, second Muslim woman, second youngest Nobel Prize winner. She was wearing her hijab when she went to collect her award. And when she went there, the reporters told her that, why are you wearing this hijab? It doesn't seem to go with your high intellect and your high education. I mean, you just won the Nobel Prize. And this is what she said. She said, man in the early times was almost naked. And as his intellect evolved, he started wearing clothes. What I am today and what I'm wearing today represents the highest level of thought and civilization that man has achieved. And it is not regressive. It is the removal of clothes again that is regressive to ancient times. I think that's very well said, extremely well said. And then, of course, everyone knows about Malala, yes, the youngest Nobel Prize winner. And I mean, she has made what a statement. I mean, she's such a role model. She fights for human rights, for children's education, and it's become an international movement, and she's a name, a household name. When we hear her name, I think we all feel so much of pride to see what she's done and how she has overcome all the barriers and challenges that she has faced in northwest Pakistan. Okay. So I'm taking you back to the future. We are back in 2018. And do you remember I said CEDAW, the International Rights of Women? Do you know the last time I checked, it has not been ratified by the USA. Are you surprised? No. And look at whom they're keeping company with. Look at their friends, Iran, Sudan, and Somalia. Okay? These are the only countries that have not ratified CEDAW. Okay? The International Bill of Rights that gives women what? Civil rights, reproductive rights, gender rights. Okay? So we stand here in the West and we tell the whole world about human rights, but we are not willing to ratify CEDAW. Okay? Why? Why won't USA ratify CEDAW? Because conservative groups and other groups say that it will challenge the laws and culture, culture of the USA. Not religion here, we're talking about culture of the country. It will undermine traditional family values. You'll have to pay men and women the same for work of equal value. It'll provide access to abortion services and contraception. It'll undermine the sovereignty of the United States of America. Pretty sad, isn't it? Okay, I've taken you a full circle. Okay, so then what is our problem? I think our problem is, yes, we must educate our women. I think that's very, very important. I'm a very strong proponent of it. Economic status of women comes with education, but it is not enough to free women from the bondage of the 21st century. Why? Because I think we need both secular education and we need religious education. And when I say that, I'm also putting the word practice. And why do I say the word practice? It's because oftentimes we tend to have a lot of book knowledge. We don't know how to apply it, right? So if I have a degree in, let's say, engineering, and I go to find a job, I'm expected to apply my knowledge, what I learned, towards the projects that I'm going to do. The same way when I learn religion, it's not about putting it on a shelf and then going and memorizing some verses for the Sunday classes. I need to practice my religion. I need to become a better person. And I think when we put the two together, when you put education, secular and religious, I think then nobody can ever break that kind of power that you get from both of these pieces of knowledge. And I think that is where we lack. We have sometimes secular knowledge, but what we lack is we don't have religious knowledge and the application of religious knowledge. So as individuals and as a society, I think we are falling short in our moral compass. I think we are falling short in accepting responsibilities. There's a lot of throw the blame on other people. And we don't accept responsibility for our action or for the lack of our action. Okay? So quickly, before I close, I just want to go towards what does Islam teach us? How does Islam teach us to become a better person? In Islam, the Quran says there are 3 stages of human development. Okay? So I just want to briefly explain. Right? The first stage is what we call the natural stage. Natural stage is to be the primitive stage. The natural stage is the animal stage. What do I mean by that? It is your eating behavior, your drinking behavior, your sleeping behavior, our fear, our anger, our impulsiveness, okay, our love, our courage, our hate, our jealousy, right? All of those are considered animalistic, primitive, autonomic, reflexes, right? You don't think about all these things. Animals have it, we have it, right? But then there is this, we think that no, love and courage are good qualities. Hate, envy are bad qualities. No. If you don't have reason behind it, you don't have intent behind it, it is not a good quality. So for example, I love my children, or you love your children, right? There's nobody here who doesn't love their children. But if my child is caught stealing, should I punish them? No, I love them so much, I cannot do that. Okay? So now I've taken a quality and I've converted it into a negative quality. So God has given us reason. We are different from animals because we have reason, we can understand. Right? So we should use that quality to become a better person. And so when we do that, when we take our animal instinct and add reason to it and then become better people, what happens is we evolve ourselves to the next stage. The Quran says that's called your moral stage. And look what it's called your self-reproving stage. Okay? That is the fulcrum. Okay, so I'm sure, observe yourself the next time you get mad or get angry or frustrated or you want to shout. Think about it, and then you're going to reason and say, why am I getting so angry? I need to lower my voice. I shouldn't use this bad word. There's no need for this strong language. I need to say sorry. Right? That's a self-reproving stage. That's what the Quran says. And that's the stage, that's the most important stage, because that is the stage where we struggle. All of us are struggling in this stage. Right? We get into some animalistic, instinctive, primitive behavior, then we say, no, I shouldn't have done that. I need to apologize. I need to improve myself. I need to change the way I feel. This is the stage. And when we are able to use our reasoning and use our morality for the right reasons at the right time and the right occasion, what happens is we reach the final stage the Quran calls the spiritual stage, or the soul at peace. Okay? And that's what we're all struggling for. So when I think about our moral consciousness, because that's what I'm talking about, I say we all seem to have lost our moral compass. The Quran says, in order to develop morally, it's a 2-step process. Okay? You have to refrain from bad, at the same time you have to do good. See, self-reproving? Yes? So you have to feel remorse when you do bad, and you have to feel remorse that I didn't do good. Okay, so it's this kind of fulcrum that goes back and forth in our mind that we are trying to increase the weight of the good deeds and decrease the weight of the bad deeds. And that is why the Quran refers to this as the jihad of your nafs. Nafs is self. So it is the struggle of myself. Okay, I'm constantly struggling to do right and to do less wrong, right? And this is another thing that is such a misconception. When you hear the word jihad, at once you think I'm going to take out my sword or something like that, right? I'm going to come into war. I'm going to have a holy war. No, jihad means nothing but struggle, a striving. Okay, so if I'm not good at a subject, I'm studying very, very hard, I'm struggling with that subject, it's my jihad. I need to overcome that jihad. I need to do better. I need to pass that exam. Okay, that's all it is. It's a struggle. And so the Holy Prophet said, of all the jihads that we talk about, going to war or trying to teach Islam or practice Islam, whatever it might be, the biggest jihad is jihad of yourself, of your own soul, okay, your own consciousness. That's our biggest jihad. Okay? So in closing then, I'm going to use this verse, and I always use this verse in most of my talks because, see what it says here. It says, chapter 1, verse 149, it says, and everyone has a goal towards which he turns his attention. Why then with one another in doing good works? Okay? So what the Quran is telling us, that set a goal for good. Set a goal to be competitive with each other in doing good. And we live in such a competitive society, right? We are always competing. I mean, which of you have not advised your brother or your sister or your children to do well in school? I don't think there's anyone here who is not. We've got some students sitting here. They're going to constantly be competing to do better, get an A, do well in the exam, do well in the SATs, do well in the MCATs, in the LSATs, whatever it is, get into good colleges, then get good jobs, compete, get the biggest house, the biggest cars, the biggest television screen. I can go on and on and on, right? Right? The latest iPhone, right? Everything. So we compete in those kind of things. We compete in materialistic things. Why? Because tangible. I can see it. I can see a reward, I can see a bonus check, I can see my house, I can see my garden. I can't see good. When is the last time you and I said, I think I'm going to compete with him in being a better person. I'm going to be more charitable. When is the last time I told my child, you don't lie for a month and I'll give you a reward. We don't think like that. So that is why I like this verse, because it says, compete, but compete, set a goal to become better and compete with one another in that kind of betterment. So I feel I'm going to leave you behind with this verse and say that if all of us think like that, rather than think about materialistic competition with each other, I think we would all become not only better as a person, but as a family, as a society, as a nation, and the whole world. I think we would all become better people. And then we would not have these misconceptions about each other. And I think we'd look for more commonalities, because when you're doing good, what is there to be dissimilar about, right? So with that, I close. Thank you very much.
Very nice work. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to take the microphone back. I might hand it back to you, though. So with that, and thank you very much, Professor Tijani, for that. That was excellent, and I'm glad it finally came from a female. Yeah. So at this point, what we wanted to do is we have a bit ahead of us, and so what we're going to do is we're going to open it up to any questions. Just raise your hand. I'll try to be fair in calling it out, and it's going to be a tag team effort, but what we've noticed is a lot of these questions end up being political. So I answer the political questions, and I think the ones that are specific to women, I'll probably hand back to the professor. And I would encourage everyone not to be shy in your questioning. And if I feel that your questions aren't controversial enough, I might ask them to myself and address them. So with that, please do raise your hand. Dr. Khan in the back.
My question to the speaker is about the media in this country. I've lived here for about half century, and I know how powerful the media are. Actually, I have a story late, but I will do that later if you have time. Would you like to comment on this? Media and how they actually affect?
So media plays a very, very important role. It can do a lot of good, it can do a lot of harm. And when you think about it, the world has become flat now. I mean, right now, in an instant, you have news from another part of the world completely, right? So we are so connected, and yet we are so disconnected because we just gobble up information. There's a communication explosion. How much should I believe? What is right? What is wrong? I see a picture. I believe the picture. I haven't really understood the background. So media is definitely at fault, but I think we also have to educate ourselves. You know, just like in research, when I tell my students, you read a paper, you don't believe the paper completely. You need to really see whether the science is really, the figures are correct, the statistics is correct, and then you make some knowledgeable assessment of the paper. Same way, I think when we read something and we Google something very quickly, say, okay, this is the fact. It may not be the fact. We need to be more, educate ourselves. And I agree with you that media can play both a very positive role and it can play a negative. And I have found that media has played both roles. It's not always been negative. It has played a positive role in some cases too. When human rights issues are concerned, media has played quite an important role.
Yes.
Just a question of curiosity. I'm just thank you at your word that I can ask anything that I want to ask. So in my professional life, I've met some Muslim men in some context and other contexts, and sometimes it's a professional setting, so I'll extend my hand to have a handshake, and sometimes that's greeted and reciprocated, and other times there's a single handshake hands. I assume it's with women. And I'm just wondering what, I suspect this is one of these cultural examples that you're talking about. Can you explain that to me a little bit better so I understand what's going on?
I'll try?
Yes.
Okay. So I also think it's cultural because nowhere in the Quran it speaks on that. But you know, in Islam we talk about modesty. So when you talk about modesty, you're not going to go out of your way to hug a strange man or shake his hand. And when you have students who come from the Middle East to study, you will find that in the first year they're very quiet, very shy. They won't make eye contact because culturally they don't. And then over time they're able to stand up and ask questions of especially male faculty. They're very shy to go in front of a male faculty. So this is a cultural thing. I would say that if a professor comes or a guest speaker comes and they say, hi, I'm so-and-so, Dr. So-and-so, I'm so, I will if they put their hand out, I will shake their hand. But that's again something that I do, but it's not that Muslim women will necessarily do. I find that my students don't do it. They'll put their hands behind when somebody shakes their hand. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
So keep the questions coming if you guys have. Also, I'd like to remind folks there's coffee and water in the back if you guys wanted to partake in that. Sorry, I saw a hand there. Yes.
A while back, I was listening to NPR, and there was a Muslim woman speaking about unfair treatment in American mosques. And I just wondered, is there any truth behind that, or where did that come from?
Unfair treatment of different types of women? Is that what she was talking about?
Women, that they weren't allowed to hear what was going on or be seated where they wanted to be seated, and that she was being reprimanded for speaking up. So there was this, like I said, it was on NPR that day. And I don't remember the woman's name, but I just remember hearing it as I was driving along in my car.
I could probably handle that.
Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to that. That does happen, unfortunately. Like in the local mosque, and I'm not defending it, but I'll kind of outline like a practical thing that happens, and then I'll underline the actual problem that Muslims have. The first one is in our like local mosque, for instance. The prayer in the mosque is mandatory upon men. Like, so men are required to pray their 5 prayers in the mosque if it's accessible. Women are not obligated to pray in the mosque. So it's not that they're not allowed to. It's just not an obligation on them. And the specific reasons for that, I don't know. So what happens is men tend to take the better area of the mosque. And so we bought a church that had outgrown, so the building we bought was from a church that had outgrown it. In the logistics, because men and women do pray separately, so for instance in the Middle East, your mosque would probably have men on the right and women on the left, or vice versa. But there is a separation that we do like to do in prayers. And so in the specific mosque that we bought, it just doesn't work side by side. So the men are upstairs, the women, because there's probably like 100 men on Fridays upstairs and maybe 15 women that attend. They end up in just the smaller place, and it's not ideal. So that's kind of the practical, that's kind of like the practical answer. But unfortunately, a lot of the things that were covered in the lecture, we bring a ton of cultural baggage with us from our countries. We bring a ton of culture, and we bring them into the mosques here. And there are Muslim men who say, women should not speak, and that, you shouldn't have a place to pray, and why are you here anyway? As a matter of fact, we do it to our female politicians. If you have a female at home, and she stays at home like, oh, well, you didn't get a career, you're just mooching off of your husband. And then when she runs for Congress and wins, they're like, well, you're obviously a bad mother and women just can't win. And so, we do it to our female politicians. So Muslims, unfortunately, Muslim men, we do it in our mosques too. I happen to be on the board of the local mosque and the president as well. And I don't know of a quick fix to this because we would have to basically take everything she said today and put it into action. But hopefully I answered that for you. But I'm definitely not denying that it does happen, unfortunately.
That leads to quite a bit of press I've read where there are communities of people and they don't integrate with the rest of the neighborhood. They stay to themselves, isolate themselves, and that's, nobody quite understands why or how or what the purpose is. First generation.
Do you mean from a, sorry?
It's first generation. I think it's first generation, and they feel more comfortable with one another. Language, clothing, eating, right? So initially they are so lost when they come to this country. There's a culture shock. So they tend to stay together.
Do their children integrate?
Yes, yes. After the second generation, you don't even know that they're from another. In colleges and all these students, you would never know. In fact, they get upset if I say, are you from India? I'm from America. They get very upset if you say that. Or are you from Pakistan? No, I'm from America. So they've integrated very well. Yeah.
There was a question back here, but let me go here first.
Muslim women, going by all this information, should be very powerful. Is there anything underfoot where women are saying, wait a minute, I don't want to be separated in a mosque? I want a demonstration of my equality. Is there anything like the old women's lib from this country?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is there anything
Do you mind if I take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Culture that would encourage that?
So that's a great question. There's not really a push to integrate the prayers, and it's actually for very practical reasons, I think. So my wife is a Muslim. She's been a Muslim. She was born Catholic, and I don't know if you've ever watched our prayer rituals, but when we pray, it's kind of a physical thing. We're not in pews, and actually I wouldn't mind even demonstrating. So when we're praying, we'll face Mecca, and like the first part of the prayer, you start like this as a man or a woman. The only exception is if you're handicapped. Then you end up doing a maneuver like this, and then you come up, and then the final kind of movement in the cycle is this movement right here. So you've actually got your head down on the ground, and my wife would be like, I don't want any men behind me when I do that, because you men are men. And so you won't find really women pushing for it at all. Now I really think in our mosque that women do, like they have not an ideal section. I think they should be able to see the sermon and to hear it like not on video or audio. It's just a practical thing. If I could do more fundraising, the first thing I would do is make a single floor mosque where there was like men and women on the same floor. And for any specific events, I'm always like telling them like I want everyone up in the main hall. But for the prayer aspect, you won't even see a push from women. And my wife would be the first one who would say, well, I'm not coming anymore because, like, I know my husband, and like, I'm not praying. I'm not praying in front of any guys. Hopefully I answered that okay for you.
There's a question.
Oh, sorry. Right here.
Yes, have you ever considered publishing a book on this? This is beautiful.
That's for you.
That's for me.
He said, have you ever considered... Sorry, you know what? I should be
I'm not a
repeating
good
the
writer.
Pardon?
I don't think I'm a good writer.
Oh my God.
No.
No, that is beautiful. I don't think there's a book on this, like you have presented.
There was a question here.
Yes.
This is a comment to the group about the putting the people in, women are separate from men and how the prayer positions that he showed. When we have our funeral prayer, very short. The body's crowded and the congregation comes together. Men in front, the deceased is shrouded there on a table. Men in front, children in the middle, and women in the back. So classically, a caravan is traveling, and men and women and children. 5 calls of prayer. It's prayer time. They stop, they do their ablution, their washing ritual before. They line up this way, men in front, children in the middle, women in back. Our mosques just don't always, we don't have the accommodations in the mosques always. And I was also going to say that I believe, if anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, Quaker churches, women on one side, men on the other, right? So you have to extend this thought process to other religious practices as well and say that there's practical reason for this. Now, in the time of battle, if you're in a dangerous situation, men take up security positions around the perimeter when prayers are called. So there are many circumstances. If you delve into Islam, you'll see that there are many practical approaches to almost everything. In fact, the thing is we are told as Muslims that God, Allah, made it easy for us. So there's a lot of practicality. So we're just kind of scratching the surface here.
Thank you for that. And just so you guys know, this is Beth Surmet, and she's actually on the board of our local mosque. So it's a female on the board, and she actually holds the executive office of secretary there, which was actually my previous role. So women in leadership in the mosque. I really encourage more questions. Sorry, let me do Dr. Khan, and then we'll come to you. Okay, so sorry, he's deferring to you.
Is there any evidence that younger women are becoming more forceful in their participation in life than older women? When I was in Egypt, I noticed that younger women were much more forceful than their parents or grandparents were.
Oh, absolutely. Do you want to?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So absolutely. I think. I mean, I have two boys, 2 girls in my household, and I think that Egypt, and I actually happen to be from Egypt too, which is interesting. Well, I actually have 2 Egyptian parents. I was born here. Absolutely. I think women. The culture is now giving them that voice. I think the laws are being enforced more where, you can't just go up and yell at women or assault them. And they certainly are. And I think that's a modern phenomenon where women are saying, like, I'm not going to be like my mom or my grandma, and I'm going to speak my mind. And that's been happening for years. I mean, growing up, I have 2 Egyptian parents, and growing up in a Muslim household, my mom was the one that owned the business, and she historically was a higher earner of income than my father. And it was no issue at all with either of them. My dad was very happy with her, and she was very happy with him, and that was just the way things were. And I don't think he ever felt any less of a provider or a husband for that. But absolutely, and my girls are, like too far that way. I mean, they're just belligerent to everyone, like men, dads, women. It's crazy. So I think that's a global phenomenon, except in the areas where education is undermined. I think if there's good education, I think women are on par with men as far as being vocal, for sure.
Can I just add?
Sure.
I'll add one more thing, and that is that when we live in a country like, say, even America, our children excel in everything else, but then we tell them be submissive when it comes to Islamic principles. You do exactly what I tell you. You can't do that to your child. So when they get educated, they open their knowledge base. They begin to question. They begin to put dots together, and they begin to look for inconsistencies and contradictions. And I think oftentimes we parents have a very important role to play, that we better know what we're talking about. If I tell my child this is wrong, I better know why I'm telling my child it's wrong. So I have to be more learned, and I have to also practice my religion before I can tell my child don't do something. So I think the younger generation, education is very important. Internet. They have a cousin in America, maybe an Egyptian living in Egypt, right? And they are doing things differently. They talk to one another. So right now we're very connected, and we can learn a lot of good as well as a lot of bad from each other.
Well, I noticed when I was there that the protests, the Arab Spring protests,
Yes.
out of Cairo in the outlying cities, seemed to be primarily led by women rather than men. And men would come up to us Americans and say, please go across the street, we don't want you to get hurt. While the women are standing up on fences. And I just found that really interesting.
And again, I think that comes down to the education level. So in Egypt, the education is skewed against not women necessarily, but the poor. So there's a really tough socioeconomic situation. And so what you find is poor people don't have access to education. But if you are middle class or higher, they really push the education of men and women equally. And so the fruits of that are being shown in that. I actually happened to be in Egypt during the revolution. Actually, I was there a year before, and I stayed till 2016. So I saw that firsthand myself. You're absolutely right. Dr. Khalid there, and we'll go.
This lady had her hand up.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm trying to be, yes, please.
I was wondering if you guys have any suggestions for how non-Muslims can advocate for Muslims. I've been put in a few very uncomfortable situations where people feel it was appropriate to try to speak badly about Muslims, and I was just completely shocked. I didn't know what to say, and I felt like I was doing a disservice. So do you have any suggestions on how somebody can redirect, or just it was recommended that I just ask them why they feel like that, or try to have a conversation. But I also feel like sometimes people that speak like that aren't very educated about things.
Yeah, I can feel. So that one there. So that happens to Muslims a lot, and what I've been trained to do is to ask questions like you were told in that situation, because that pattern is not only applied to Muslims right now. Right now there's supposedly a dangerous caravan coming from the south, and so like all Mexicans are bad. I'm saying that in jest, obviously. So people from South America are bad, and so people are, Muslims are bad, women are bad, and so it really comes down to understanding like where they got that and how to break it apart. But it's a really tough discussion. I mean, you can send them to the Circle of Peace website. It's circleofpeaceonline.org. And I actually forgot to even mention like the main sponsor of the event, Circle of Peace. And I'll speak to that maybe at the end. But I think you send them to the right places. Or if you guys want, you can. And Arif, I think, has a point there to make.
I just have a comment to your question. Think about human rights, the human declaration of human rights. That's the highest set of ideals that we all aspire to get. And you may or may not know that the Quran
supports each of the 30 articles of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And if that is true, then the Muslim religion cannot be as bad as it is portrayed out to be. I've published papers about the human rights, and certainly Muslims have done something in the last 10, 12 years to undermine it, but that is a political consideration. There's a book that cross-references every article of the Declaration to the scripture. I'm sure that I can give you an electronic copy of it.
Wow, thank you.
And I have some my email address on the business card. I can give it to you. Anybody wants it, and I email that copy to you.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
There was, sorry, let me get yours, but there was a question up there. Sorry.
Can I just address one thing for her? Is also, the issue is also, I blame us too. Because if we portray Islam in a negative light to somebody, they're going to have a negative image of us. So I think we have as much of a role to play in removing the misconceptions. And you have a role to play in saying, you know, that's not true. I know some Muslim people and they're not like that. So it goes both ways. So I think we must take the responsibility too to make sure we portray Islam in the right light, but also by practicing, not just by standing on a podium and giving big speeches.
Actually, thank you very much for that. I'll add one final point to that, is we give the media plenty of ammunition against us. Oh my gosh. So, sorry, I lost track of the hands, but we had a question here, and then we'll work our way that way.
Again, just a comment that organizations, groups can always come to our mosque, and we can dialogue with them.
Yes, absolutely. And that's an open invitation for anyone at any time to stop by the mosque.
As in your article in the paper advertising this discussion, you spoke of cultural versus religious aspects. Could you touch on some of these, make us aware of some of these different countries, and because we get it from the media, and you know that's I hesitate to say fact, but it's embedded in there. So can you enlighten us on a few of these cultural differences?
That's a great question. I think I can handle it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
But it was in my slide too with Malala, Northwest Pakistan, right? So that would be a cultural thing.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. So let's address that, and let's go ahead and bring out like the biggest culprit of this, Saudi Arabia. So for me to address this, I need everyone to call home and say you're not going to be home till tomorrow, and everyone get comfortable. No, I'm kidding. But it could easily be that way. But this is the way I look at it. How many people live in America? 330 million, I think, is the last count. In Saudi Arabia, you have, I think it's between 22 and 26 million people that are like citizens of Saudi Arabia. And no one needs like an introduction as to how much like wealth that country has. So, and this is a person who stepped foot in the country, spent 3 weeks there. There are poor people there. There are a lot of poor people there. And so the conclusion that a lot of political folks will draw is that what you have now in America, we talk about oligarchy and like big business runs everything. In Saudi Arabia, it's not even like big business, it's a family. And what they've done is they've taken ownership of the country, and they control all the mineral rights of the country, and they dole it out to their family in amazing quantity for doing absolutely nothing. So what do? So what's their biggest fear? Their biggest fear is that someone catches on to what they're doing and takes this away from them. And with 22 million people against a family of, I don't know what that number is right now, a smaller family, this is something that can easily be wrested away from them. So how do they keep this power? Major suppression of any opposing voice, major suppression of women. I think if they let women have free reign, they would have fixed the problem years ago. But there are people right now on trial for sending out tweets, and the punishments are lashings, and there have been people beheaded over just saying something that is anti-government. And so if you can control women and you can control dissenting voice, you can take the mineral resources of a nation like that and just give it to your family. And that's literally how the economic system works. And I won't go into the US politics of how we support them, but unfortunately right now, it's in America's best interest financially not to say anything about them. But way before we decided to attack and help out in Syria, or to get involved anywhere else on the planet, Saudi would have been the first place to go if it was a moral thing. If it was like, Iraq, it's like, oh, we're going to liberate Iraq. You could have liberated Saudi Arabia like 52,000 times before that. And so again, it's suppression of women, suppression of foreigners, suppression of darker skinned people, suppression of Muslims who happen to live there that don't have like the Saudi lineage. They're all oppressed. Women, I just really get the brunt of it there. But so let me answer the actual question. So to maintain this power structure, not only did Saudi have to implement this within their boundaries, but they actually preach a lot of this doctrine as part of the religion globally. And when you have this type of access to literally unlimited wealth, they really have been effective at spreading this message. And I will say in America, in Egypt, Malaysia, when you have countries that have cities that don't have access to electricity or water, and the Saudi government comes in and builds a 2-story mosque with air conditioning in it, they're like, these guys have to be from God. How do you blow cold air out of this big box? And so to protect that power structure, they actually had to sell this version of Islam globally. Yeah, and I can actually go into the history of Wahhabism, and actually the founder, and there's a lot there. You have to call home and tell them, like, you're not coming. There was a question over there, and then, yes?
I have a question about the rift within Islam between the Shia and the Sunni, and how much that has muddied the waters for all of us, and you too, as a Muslim.
Yeah, so that's So what's interesting? So what's interesting about that is your typical Sunni Shia relation was just fine in Iraq before the Iraq War. Those communities lived just fine together in peace and harmony for, like 1,000 years. But forever. The thing, being a Sunni Muslim myself, if there's Shia Muslims that vary from the way I practice by this much, and then there's Shia Muslim sects that vary by a huge amount. The way I view those on a personal level is I start to look at it as a slightly different religion, which is fine. The Saudi government pushes this narrative that these are people who are corrupting the religion from within, and that it's like some weird thing, and they don't treat it as a different religion or a different sect. They look at it as an undermining of like let's just call it mainstream Islam, and they've just taken it upon themselves to war with those guys. I really think the U.S. would not have a lick of interest in Iran, other than Saudi just pushing that narrative. Like, we got to take care of these guys. Proselytizing within Saudi is completely prohibited to anyone except Muslims, but the Shia, they're not even hardly allowed there, or if they're there, they keep it quiet. So this is, again, part of that cultural thing, part of the Saudi narrative of controlling that power base that foments this war. But I went to George Mason University to start, and we prayed side by side with Shia and Muslims, and they were slightly different. You could barely tell, and you would just ask them, and I'm Shia. So I think it's just more of a divide and conquer kind of methodology. Hopefully I answered that okay for you. So we were there and then there?
Just curious about the cultural diversity within this Islamic Society of Southwestern Washington. Can you talk a little bit about the different origins, roots, expressions of Islam that are within that particular society?
Yeah, so we have a fairly decent immigrant population. We seem to be an area where refugees come. So we have a pretty elaborate Gambian community, which you would never suspect. Bosnians. There's some Iraqis that were Iraqis that actually helped U.S. forces during the war, and because staying in Iraq would mean that they would be probably killed, they ended up getting citizenship here in the U.S. There's quite a good contingent of converts to Islam, so Americans who happened upon Islam and wanted a place to pray. There's a good contingent of that. There's a small Arab or mainly Palestinian, some Egyptian culture groups there. I don't know if I've missed any. Yeah, there's a good Indo-Pakistani community, like half of our board. Like Dr. Khalid, who's on our board of trustees, was like, "What about the Indo-Pakistan?" So sorry. Yeah. So hopefully I answered that okay. It's very diverse, and I grew up in the D.C. area, and it was amazing. And it was one of the reasons why I really fell in love with the religion is that I remember praying next to. I remember being in a row of like maybe 50 people praying, and I think everyone was a different nationality. I don't think there was a single repeat in the line. Vietnamese, Chinese, you name it, Malaysian, Indonesian, American, and then all socioeconomic backgrounds. A rich guy next to a poor guy, black and white. It really was just. It was just one place where, when they were properly practicing, it really was, blind to every, line of distinction that we have. Sorry, there was one down here, and then we'll go. Yes.
So goes back to the professor. I'm curious about the meaning of the hijab. I grew up Catholic, I'm also Catholic, and there is similar traditions, right? So when I was a little girl, we always wore a veil of some sort when we went to church to show reverence and respect. But there was also the side of it that I think I'm wondering if it's sort of like we weren't allowed to wear revealing clothing because the boys couldn't handle it, and so we had to cover ourselves up because the boys can't handle it, and I'm wondering if those are elements of the hijab, or am I missing?
No, those are all elements of hijab. They all are concepts of haya and modesty. Because one is your own self-dignity, your own self-respect. If you don't give yourself self-respect, nobody else is going to respect you. So I think that we forget sometimes, that we always looking for other people to respect us, but we don't have the same decorum, or we don't behave in a way that people say, I need to treat her with respect. So that's one aspect. But then the other aspect is true that as we are growing up and we're teenagers and we're going through those phases, you don't want to be exciting the opposite gender. So you don't want to be wearing inappropriate clothes and having them then look at you in a negative light. So yes, both. It's both. Yeah. Yes. For him.
If you're done with questions, I would like to relate that story. If you're done, I don't know if there are other questions.
There's one question. Student there wants to. Yes.
I just wanted to ask about the reaction that the Muslim community had when the two girls on the MAX train last year were confronted about their hijabs, and then the reaction that people had to also the support from people of Portland that stood up for them, and how you guys see that.
It was a local event.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So I know that it wasn't organized by Muslims, but it was mainly it was a huge contingent of Muslims that attended the vigil for the. I think it was really three people who stepped in to defend the two girls, and at that vigil, I think there was even family members of that. So I don't think there was a Muslim in that crowd that didn't go up and personally thank them. I actually spoke at that event as well, and I mean. That goes to show how amazing of an area this is, that these people, selflessly just put their lives on the line and stood up for these girls. I know the Muslim area it was a group in Portland, or it was probably one or two people. They ended up doing a GoFundMe type of campaign too, and I think in the end it was in the 6 digits that they ended up raising for the families to cover their expenses and funeral. But I do know Muslims started that for the families. And then on another strange note, and this is kind of stepping away from the women specifically, but a lot of people use the word jihad they're like, oh, these Muslims, they want to just wage war and fight jihad and just warmonger. And jihad really was about struggle. And a lot of the Muslim scholars would say that jihad is really like that concept of a hero, someone who just throws themselves down for no reason but because it's the right thing to do, knowing full well they'll lose everything worldly. So, that person who gives $1 million, who only had $1 million to a fund, or a person who had $10 gives the whole amount. That martyrdom, I think if I took that to Muslim scholars and said, would these people that threw their lives down for these two girls wearing hijab, would that be an automatic admission into heaven? And I think a lot of them would say, yeah, that was absolutely the ultimate self-sacrifice. And so when we throw this word hijab around, this word jihad around, that would be like an Islamic understanding of what jihad really is, and not just fighting over oil. Dr. Khan, if you're going to speak, you should use the mic.
Okay.
Yeah. So Dr.
Interesting story.
Yes. So Dr. Khalid Khan is behind the scenes, and so is out of here behind the scenes that organize a lot of these events. And I think I end up being the one on stage because I speak so much. We can give him the mic
You can
there.
wear that.
This one?
You can wear
This
this
one
as
too.
well.
Or if we even just, if you just click that on.
This one is okay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me in the back?
Yes.
All right. A couple of things first. I'm sure some of you know this, but all of you may not. If you look at the population of Muslims on this planet, it's the second largest group, right? There are about 2.5 billion Christians and about 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion, 1.7 billion Muslims. So it's a huge number. There are 56 countries which have Muslim majority, okay? And there's a whole spectrum, anywhere from Saudi Arabia, where women could not drive, to Pakistan, where she could be a prime minister, right? So keep that in mind. In fact, at one time at Karachi University, there were more female students than male students. So keep that in mind. You really have to have a global picture of these things. And by the way, I must thank the speaker who did a fantastic job. I think she really needs. It was a great overview. Now, the two stories about media. As I said, I arrived in this country in 1969 as a graduate student, North Carolina, so about 50 years next year. And I have really observed the media here very, very carefully. Two stories. In the early 90s, when Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister, she was the Prime Minister in Pakistan, early 90s. And I think it was part of this 2020 program, and Tom Jeriel, many of you remember that name, he did a segment on the status of women in Pakistan. And the hyperbole that he was using was something like this. This is a country where women are most exploited and most persecuted in the world, and blah, blah, blah. While he's interviewing a woman prime minister, a woman university professor, and a woman lawyer who's actually fighting for their rights. Now, can you see the silliness of this whole thing? They are the most exploited, but they can be prime minister, right? Okay. Second story. After 9/11, I think it was like year 2004 or something, I was visiting my brother's family in Dallas. And I've got two nephews. The younger one said, Uncle, let me show you a little videotape. So I said, okay. It was like a 50-minute videotape where somebody from the RAND Corporation, senior fellow from RAND Corporation, and many of you know that name. It's a think tank which does strategic planning. And the senior fellow was giving a presentation in front of Navy graduates about Islam. Very good presentation, very balanced presentation. And at the end there was question and answers. So somebody asked him about the media, American media. And these are his words, and I quote. With a chuckle, he said, What can I say about American media? If you were to listen to something on CNN in Europe versus CNN in this country, you would think that the CNN in this country was broadcasting from La La Land. These are his words. So please, 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 when you read things, read between the lines. And forums like these are much more effective than just watching that boob tube and getting boobed with that. Thank you for your time.
Thanks to everyone again. Was there any final questions? We're kind of up against the limit, but yes.
Just real quick, touching on that, if you look into IslamoPhobiaNetwork.com, it goes over all of the players as far as the media, who's making money off of Islamophobia, the major funders, the amount of money that's being funneled to propagate the cultural misperceptions that many of you see.
What was the website?
Yes, say it again.
IslamoPhobiaNetwork.com.
Say it again.
IslamoPhobiaNetwork.com. And it outlines all of the donations.
She's got a question.
Thank you very much for that. That's huge. I'll try to post that to the site as well. We had one question there and then... yes. So we'll mention that before we... Actually, let me do it before I forget. So there's a Thanksgiving interfaith service at the Latter-day Saints Church in Ridgefield, where the Muslim community and a lot of other faith groups will be participating. So that's November 24th. Sorry, November 24th at 7 p.m. Thanksgiving Eve. It changed. 21st. Thank you. 7 p.m. And we'll take a question.
So my question was that there was a person over here who had done some treatises about how to counter, you answered in response to how do I counter this information if someone is bashing a Muslim or Islam itself, and you said that you had some information you could share. Can you provide your email or some information, you had a booklet or something? I think that would be very powerful.
Yes, what I said was that we should educate ourselves to be able to answer to those sort of questions or criticism. And there's a website which it's www.circleofpeaceonline.org.
Okay.
And there's a publication on that.
Okay.
And I am not sure if I posted that paper on human rights. I think it's on there, but I'll give you my email address. Write to me. I'll make sure.
Okay, centerofpeaceonline.org.
Circle of Peace Online.
Okay.
And Circle of Peace is a group that we formed together. This is my co-founder sitting right next to me, Troublemaker, I call him. And our main role is to educate, provide education stuff, publish stuff, and do seminars like this around the US. And hopefully next year we are talking about going to Australia. There's another chapter there. So visit the website, look at the previous presentations here online, and also read the publications. And I was just saying, somebody, I think I was telling you about it, I wrote a paper on the historical relationship between Jewish and Muslim communities from the time of the Holy Prophet. And that period I don't think is well captured by the Muslim authors. And there's some other authors who have, I think, mistreated that period. So that book is also on the website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for starting that group and sponsoring this. I really applaud that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Now, wait, you said you would post something on the website.
So if you go back to the invite, if you go back to the invitation, the link that you might have gotten, what I'll do is I'll go back and update it with some follow-up material.
Thank you.
Yeah, that way, so if you have your ticket, then I'll try to link that data back. Thanks for everyone for coming out. Please take a bottle of water with you on your way out the door, and that way